Yeah, thanks everyone for joining this open discussion here. I'd pose the question. I'm coming from a background as an engineer, but usually more on the client-facing side. So, as a web engineer or an iOS engineer, done some creation of API stuff. Usually more as a reviewer of docs and not so much the creator of them. But in my current role, leading the developer relations team at my employer, realized that it'd actually be really good to get sort of better at doing this, and particularly with OpenAPI Swagger, which is the spec format that we're using. And I've picked up a lot over the last year or so of getting pretty good at reading the official Swagger docs, uh, even just sort of picking up from examples that I see. But the point of what I wanted to do was really figure out like how can I level up that particular skill? Like, what are good, conferences, books, blogs, people to follow, videos to watch, whatever is out there that just if I wanted to get really good or better at designing APIs with some of the better practices from the OpenAPI spec, I'd definitely love to hear some thoughts.
I kind of have a follow-up question. So, do you feel like you want to grow more in the design best practices? You're trying to make a decision about what to recommend maybe for a better developer experience, of some endpoint. And you're trying to figure out, should we use this or should we do this? And or with the, open API lens, or are you just kind of wondering sometimes about that just in general? Like what is the better option?
Yeah, it's a little hard to tease them apart, and I think
Yeah.
sort of more practically. Um, like I think a recommendation I'd seen is Arnaud Lart's design of Web API's book, which is a really good book on API sort of design in general, not necessarily with Open API spec. And so that's great for sort of general design principles. But I
Yeah.
am interested in how to get better at encoding some of those, given what's very flexible in Open API, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of the tricky thing to this is like open API doesn't want to have, it's not, prescriptive in that you must design, there's a few things like that, but you must design it like this. And so there's that flexibility. So that's when you kind of have to lean more just on like general design best practices at that point. Um, like, do you have I'm kind of curious. Um, can you think of like a time when you were like, I kind of wish I knew how to like do this better? Like when trying to make a, design related decision or something like that. Or something that just like really confused you, like when trying to figure out like how to do it best in open API.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So one thing that can be difficult when we have tons of engineering teams that are producing docs and we're trying to get a better standard way of doing those, even though we've all agreed to go with the YAML flavor and OpenAPI 3. So it's good. It's a good starting point. But then you end up having sort of like interesting topics of like, well, one approach to designing, let's say, data responses might be, well, let's just make it in line with the API path. And if we end up needing to reuse it elsewhere, then let's extract it out as an actually defined schema element that can be reused. And the sort of opposite philosophy is, well, but if we just defined it as its own schema element to begin with, even if it's only used in a single place, doesn't that give us more flexibility to do so or more obviousness in the future so that a teammate on a completely different team can sort of look at what a catalog of responses are versus sort of having to independently come up with, oh, I noticed that this response looks very similar to the response we have or we're looking to do. I'll just reuse that versus, as you might expect, copy and pasting or just sort of independently coming up with a response that's completely the same shape as used elsewhere, right? That gets hard to manage and deal with at scale,
Yeah.
particularly for code reviews.
Yeah. I mean, part of that is a tooling thing, and then part of that is a people thing. it's tricky. Like, I mean, that was something like that would come up a lot when I was working at Stoplight, and yeah, it's a tough problem. Like, you really want people to be like reusing some of those responses and different things like that, but at the same time, like, how do you enforce that, or how do you push people towards that? A lot of what the keynote panel was actually talking about. Just from like things that have helped me. I mean, I was in the lucky position that I was helping hundreds of people do figure out something in the spec. So many times I worked a lot of support sometimes because Stoplight was small when I first joined. And, so I would just get people's questions of like, we want to do this with the API. How do we do this in the editor? And what it wasn't like how to do this in the editor. It was like how to do this in OpenAPI was the actual thing that they were trying to figure out. And so it was just like exposure. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, there's content out there, but I still feel like a lot of it's kind of introductory. It's like level 100, and there needs to be more like level 200, level 300. And so I honestly don't have a great answer. But I was hoping maybe some other folks had answers to that. Like, how did they get better at that?
Yeah, I can. So hi, I'm Harsha. I work at Wayfair. So there's a few things that so firstly, the question about leveling up and specifically with OpenAPI, I think it's sort of, if you look at it as an ecosystem, there's a bunch of moving parts in OpenAPI where like are you trying to be language agnostic? Are you trying what are your standards for your company? I think once what we've discovered is once you align with a certain set of standards and rule sets that you define, it is really useful to educate people. Education is the key here. Like, the more you spread the message, it's like developers they can hit themselves on the face so many times, if that makes sense. And eventually they want to learn. And I think that is how you educate people and you level up everyone. And some of the good resources that I've found, talking about like Stoplight, like APIs You Won't Hate is one good blog that I keep an eye on. It has really well thought out like blog posts by Phil Sturgeon, and I think Everett and Matt Trask and a bunch of people there. They are very knowledgeable, and that's something I use to think about things or start a conversation in my like company and teams. Like, hey, what do you think about H8OS or like stateful specifications and stuff, and GraphQL and gRPC. So that is how I feel I level up my knowledge, and it's all about education and having folks like being empathetic to client needs, or like being a platform team or an API designer at a company. It's more about being empathetic towards your customer teams and helping them along the way and enabling them rather than being a deterrent. I think that was brought up in the keynotes too. Yeah, if you folks have any thoughts on that. We automate all of this, by the way. So we try to stay away from the developers, like be an enabler rather than a hindrance. And that's how we approach it at our company.
Do you feel like those design kind of conversations, then they're happening at a code level? Is that what you're talking about versus with automation versus it happening in a like kind of spec first level?
Well, so we being like a big company have the luxury of design reviews. So we have, we have a team or like a few folks that are distributed across the company who are domain experts and but also like API experts. So they understand their domain, be it, order management is one. They can be experts in that. So they do contribute a lot to these best practices and defining their own team's standards. And then we use things like, Spectral and OpenAPI CLI to actually link the APIs and verify against the rule sets. And that is all automated. Like once you generate your project's GitHub repo, all of those modules are set up for you, and they just stay out of your way as long as you maintain your API specification in a clean, nice, standardized way. But if you deliberately want to break this, it will not let you deploy a breaking change to production. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Actually, so that actually brings up an idea about how to level up is reading other companies' style guides. Arnaud, I think, has a website where he was cataloging a good number of them when he found them, because there are quite a few public ones out there for large companies. And I had learned a lot just looking through some of them around just different design decisions and considerations they had, and that kind of helped kind of develop some of that. And then also like thinking about how would that translate to OpenAPI, like in a spec that's written with OpenAPI.
Yep.
And then part of looking at those style guides came from, so I actually was the one who kind of led releasing Spectral.
Wow,
pushing
nice.
to open source it. I mean, it was always like a thing that we were kind of doing, but I was like, no, let's please, let's push this.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is an awesome tool. Yep.
I mean, part of it came around was like, we tried using Speci, which Phil had worked on when he was still at WeWork. And there was just certain things that didn't work for how we were trying to bring it into our editor. And so, we kind of had to split out and do our own. And so then that turned into Spectral. And then when Phil had left WeWork, it worked out because me and Speci wasn't going to get as much attention and love. So it all worked out really nicely. But there was definitely at first like, what's, questioning, like putting this out there, especially in like a small team when you put up open source project, I didn't want to just put it out there and then just let it sit. I wanted to get like attention and love it needed. And luckily that worked out. And so it's been really awesome to see where Spectral has come since just, I guess, last year. Yeah, like mid last year, March or April or something like that. But yeah, but back to style guides, because so much of the idea was that, we take Spectral and people can write, convert their style guides to something that, Spectral could run off of. But I've learned a lot from just looking at style guides, because it made it a little bit more concrete, because I could look at these like books sometimes that talked about API design, but the style guides made it a little bit more real, because these were like teams are actually using these for their review processes or whatever.
Yeah, Async API was the selling point for us, and Spectral supported OpenAPI and Async API, I believe. So that's a big win. So we do gRPC, we do GraphQL, we do REST, and also like Async API using Kafka and QTT and whatever. So it's hard when OpenAPI is so specific to REST. Like, how do you also like help other frameworks and domains that you have in your company also level up and be at the OpenAPI tooling is amazing. Like the style guides you can actually, for example, you can refer to literally copy paste Zalando's style guide. That's just an example. You can copy paste that and directly use that because it's so portable. But stuff like that does not exist for Async API and GraphQL. So you have to come up with your own standards and build tooling around it. And if you folks have any folks on like leveling up that or any resources, I would love to hear, because that's where we've struggled as a company, but we've built our own standards. Unfortunately, they're not open sourceable yet due to bandwidth constraints. But if there's some, it's not just OpenAPI. OpenAPI is very awesome, but there's like a whole spew of like things that are still not like I would say like robust enough.
That's fine. I mean, when you think about like Swagger, how long it's existed, and then now OpenAPI, there's been a lot of time for people to build tooling around it. I mean, even in just like the last few years, I feel like the speed has very much increased, and it's hard with like when you have like gRPC, which, comes out of Google, and so it's kind of tricky because, there's probably a lot of good internal tools that they have, but, they're not all of them are out there. And yeah, I mean, the thing is just like, it's a time thing. I mean, I don't even know how old Async API is now. But, it's been awesome to see they have, the team is now more than just Fran. And, they're getting some resources, and I think, been putting a lot of work in that's really awesome with the resources that they do have. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I think what's really helped, I mean, companies like, Smart Bear and Stoplight and Postman and all those, like, they have capital that they're, behind these tooling and stuff that they're building, so that really makes, a huge difference. I first started years ago with API Blueprint using Apiary. And, I had a mixed experience. That was like my first like API specification I had used. And it was like using the text-based editor. And I was really struggling because I was just like, just like what Jaime said earlier about reading the spec is like, takes a while just to like understand that. And then expecting someone to do it in a text-based editor with like no linting or any of that. It's like, it's a hard thing to ramp up from. And so until you can really like start getting cooling around that is when you start actually getting that adoption.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been kind of helpful is the mind share dominance, if nothing else, of VS Code and how flexible it's been.
Totally, yeah.
Plugins that help you with a lot of this are definitely really nice and appreciated.
Yeah, I think VS Code has definitely been like a model. Like a lot of companies look at what they've done with plugins for their own ecosystems and are like, how do we do that? Because the number of them is just huge.
So to coming back to one topic, I brought up an example, and I'm looking at the Swagger spec because it was something I referred back to when this discussion came up about data types, specifically around numbers, and a separate discussion around strings being used as UUIDs. And it's really tough because I read like, all right, well, what's officially supported? It's like, okay, well, in this case, I understand why the writer of the API for our API said, oh, I think this can be a number. And pretty good folks said, well, if that's an amount and this is banking, we really don't want that to be a floating point because that'll cause cross-platform problems. And for a different endpoint that was using number, it was like, well, we really don't need number. This is probably more an integer, right? So there's sort of those even sort of fundamental ones that can get interesting. And at least those are more concrete that I can point to. The thing that's tough for me, while I do appreciate the flexibility of OpenAPI, is just coming in as a newbie of like, oh, so you can have formats such as email or UUID, and those sound really good. And I've seen examples like, oh, if I was a reader, that's a hint to me what this string looks like, and I don't have to put in words, this is a UUID, right? And that's appreciated, but then I just don't know, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. Is this a good idea to use UUID as a format? It is allowed, but that practical advice and experience of, hey, that's a great idea, or no, you really shouldn't do this, even though it's allowed, is I'm curious about.
I used to just not see a lot of people using it. And sometimes I think that was just like an education problem. Like they didn't even know it existed. I mean, so many times if someone is doing something from a text-based editor that isn't like VS Code, using some kind of plugin that's helping them, you're not, unless you're looking right at the spec at the same time, you might not, if you're just looking at, for example, you're looking at another team's spec. And so you're using that to kind of help guide you write yours. And that other team didn't use format. So then you don't even know format exists. I think the biggest problem with the format though, is if you're using that in a tooling sense and you're using different tools and maybe one tool supports it and one tool doesn't, but you expected it just to do it. To do some kind of validation maybe or something like that, that can kind of get you in like a trap. Even like I'm looking at the Smart Bear version of the specification. And in the format, there's bullets and it just says, and others. Like it's like email, UID, URI, host name, IP addresses, and others. And you're like, wait, what are the others? It can get tricky. I wish more tools were upfront with the things that they've built in support for and the things that just aren't supported. Like format, for example. If you don't have complete format support, let me know so I don't like do something and then regret it later, or make an effort to or think that, oh, this is supported in the specs, so I should put this in my document, and then realize, oh, the tool's not going to show that in my API docs for my users or something when I thought it was going to.
Yeah, I think what it strikes me is that it's definitely great to have very open and flexible specs, but I think for folks who don't sort of live and breathe in that area, it's helpful for folks like me to have some, well-informed, opinionated setups of hey, if you're looking to do this sort of thing, you kind of want to go with this setup. If you're looking to do this other thing, you want to go with this setup.
Yeah,
I've definitely appreciated seeing that sort of thing happening in the, the web front-end JavaScript world, where there's definitely opinionated setups you can buy into if it meets your needs.
kind of like templates almost.
Yeah. So even just basic things of okay, cool. We have to have some sort of numbers. Should we be using number with a format of float or double? Should we be using integer? It just takes extra time to sort of get comfortable and go with that. And if you had guidance of hey, are you doing banking in amounts? Don't ever do this. Do this other thing. It's helpful guidance, right? It saves time.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, having that in some kind of style guide, if you're not going to build out the templates for it and have those available, even just having that in style guide, because, we use this because for banking, and the reasons there. I think I even think about common error messages, making sure those are shared. Because sometimes if it's the same, you're getting the same error code but different messages, that can get really confusing. That takes brain power for the user to figure out is this the same problem? And so just having those shared can be really helpful. Yeah, I know I probably did not answer the question totally. The problem is, this is the thing a lot of people are struggling a little bit with. OAI is trying to work on some more education stuff, which I'm hoping can at least help some people with this problem. But yeah.
No, it's definitely much appreciated. Thanks for allowing me to ask this question and then get some guidance from folks. I think it's perfectly valid that sometimes the answer is there isn't a good answer, which identifies a need in the industry and makes me feel better as a newbie of oh, okay, it's not just that I lack Google searching skills or lack some sort of knowledge. There actually might be a gap here.
Yeah. And I mean, some of it is also just needing experience so that you see all these things so that you could maybe one day write a style guide that you feel like is more encompassing of challenges that you faced and then giving recommendations of how to handle it. Okay, I'll see you around.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.